first to give us her 2 minutes.
Thanks, everybody. I think this topic is juicy and something that we all probably should tackle this year. There have been plenty of scandals in the past, and there's obviously one right now with the post office still ever present on our minds. With the work that I do as an integrity officer, I see this conflict between accountability and justice and forgiveness all the time in the boardroom. I see CEOs becoming furious about, an act of a competitor or a partner in business or an employee, and language like, it's unforgivable, they must pay, we can't let them get away with it, we can't roll over, let's not let them off. So I think sometimes there's a disconnect between justice and grace, and that if you forgive somebody, you are a soft touch and that we don't learn. I actually think that forgiveness and grace is wisdom at work. So I can give you all sorts of examples. I have a personal situation at the moment where I have an ex-client who has decided that he wishes to blame advisors for the bad bargain that he made and is threatening to sue the advisors involved. That includes me. And a very personal reaction to that is I'm affronted, deeply upset about it, but I have to give it to God. So the only way that I can manage myself proportionately in that moment, because it is, unforgivable in a sense, is to give it to God, to pray for that individual themselves, because I know that they are responding from their own broken place, to make sure my own ego and self-interest are out of the way, to seek the truth, to look for reconciliation and transparency, and in all of it, accept that maybe there will be some learning for all of us, not just the person who is making the claim, if you like. So that's just a tidbit for me in terms of giving it to God, believing in Him that there's a bigger picture in the moments when you need to show accountability and justice, but also you want to operate from a grace perspective. You can only do that in God's strength. You have to get yourself out of your own way. And it can be a really beautiful thing. And there's nearly always learning that comes from it. So I, for one, am really excited about this theme. And I would encourage everybody to go as deep as they dare with stories and examples, because we will learn from each other that way. So yeah, I'm not going to, if I carry on, Peter, I'll be there for another 6 minutes. So I'm going to hand off whilst I scroll.
That's very disciplined of you. Thank you, Dawn. Over to Kim.
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties there. So one of the things that I really like about this theme is the pairing of just grace. Sometimes in organizations, we think that we have to be grace-filled, which means we just kind of grin and bear it and go along, and we're the ones that are going to be, if we want to be good Christians, we just make things work. And if you think about the two together, the grace, forgiveness, and accountability, there's elements of honesty, vulnerability, and clarity, which if you tackle these head on, which takes also courage, provides opportunities for redemption. So change behavior and reconciliation, renewed relationships. So I think about that in terms of practically when I mentor young managers who are dealing with relationships at work or problems with performance of employees. And it's really tough to have those conversations. But if we don't provide grace, and we don't provide opportunities for redemption or reconciliation. So I'm really excited about the theme and how those two words are played together: just grace, forgiveness, and accountability.
Lovely. Thank you. Lovely. Over to David. And do post questions in the chat. If you've got questions occur to you, just put them there and we'll come to them later. David, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much for suggesting I join this conversation and discussion. I found the biggest disappointment in my experience, and I've got several little anecdotes to share with you, was to employ a Christian man. And I discovered that he was very unreliable. He was a very poor worker. He didn't keep up with any of his colleagues. And, I had to reprimand him and give him notice. And eventually he was let go. And his reply to that was that he thought it was a very unchristian thing to have done. And that hurt at the time. So, but my industry, the construction industry, is riddled with corruption. Big jobs, for example, in the Middle East. I was tendering for a major job, and the site manager said, "What's in this for me?" And I had to say to him, "Well, actually, we are just the manufacturer of the product. Our distributor here in Dubai they buy it from us, from the factory gate, they pay for the shipping, and then they charge what they need to charge to make a profit, a small profit." And I said, "But you'll have to talk directly to them." They went to see him, I think, a week later, and within 3 weeks, he was dismissed by his company and was sent back to the UK. Now, I felt very sorry for that, but he was openly asking for a backhander, and we didn't do that, and never have done, and never will. But there's been very good examples as well. I used to take the post every Friday afternoon. My staff would all go at 4:00. I didn't often get away until about 6. I would take our post, to the local post office, and the lady behind the desk said to me one Friday afternoon, "Would you interview my son, because he's kind of lost his way, and he needs to get a good job." So I said, "Yes, send him along." And indeed, he came. He had no qualifications whatsoever. He was in late teens. And I encouraged him to consider doing day release and going to the university. He couldn't get into university, but he did manage to do the foundational year at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. And he got in, and he went on and got his BA, Bachelor's of Arts degree in business studies. And he worked all the way through that. We made him the production director. And then sadly, he managed to qualify for a very better and bigger job with a larger outfit than mine. And we lost him. So I was a bit sore about that, because I thought I'd put a lot of my own help and time with him. However, there were other developments as well. One day I went into the factory, and I saw a new chap driving one of the forklifts. And I thought, this isn't right, because you have to do training and get it certified, and we were very strict about that. So I went up and asked him who he was, and he told me his name was Barry Highfield. He had come over from Rhodesia, that's what it was called then, and he was already a qualified forklift driver. So we employed him. He then did part-time study work, brought him into the office, and he became an accountant. And then he did part-time, he went to study at Cranfield, and he's now a senior lecturer and head of department at Cranfield University. And I thought I gave him a little bit of a hand up, and I feel that was one that really did pay off very well. So that's the end.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, your stories, David, are amazing. If you don't know, David's a serial entrepreneur, so he's got decades of good stories to tell us, and hopefully this year he'll tell us some more. Thank you so much, David. Camille, your turn.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this topic, and what came to mind was when I was running my clergy fashion line, and when we would be dealing with customer service and you'd get an email back. For me, I would always say we had the best clients in the world. They were all women in ministry. So it was awesome to work with them all the time. But there would be times when we would get some, tough emails back, someone, looking for their order, looking for a dress or something, and get some really tough, curt emails, that really probably went a little bit over the top than what the situation really required. Maybe in my flesh, I wanted to respond back quite sharply as they did. But again, extending that grace, taking time, taking a moment to just pray and process. And often the key that I would give myself was time. And so just give myself some time and then reply back, but really just pouring out a lot of love, almost going over the top, massive apologies. We are so sorry. This is definitely not what we would want to, give to you, especially for who you are and everything else. Then often what would come back, again, because of the grace that was extended, what would come back is, I'm sorry, actually, our email to you was probably a little bit over the top. I'm going through something at the moment. Keep me in your prayers. And then it would actually open up a dialogue for more prayers and everything else. So that was definitely where we had to extend grace, where we had to forgive, where we were maybe being accused of things that weren't quite right, and addressing it head on, but addressing it with a lot of love and grace. So definitely looking forward to this topic, and again, understanding how we can apply these biblical principles in a really practical way. So I'm excited about what we have and what God has in store for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. It's great to have you, Camille. It's great to have people running organizations as you all are and responsible for managing people. Karen has rejoined the panel and hopefully you recovered from giving that brilliant introduction. Thank you so much. Karen, it's your turn.
I have a similar experience to David in terms of needing to fire somebody, and I think it's coming up in the chat as well in terms of the different responses that I had. So I was thinking of going through that, but actually I think, it's a very similar situation to this day. I don't know whether I fired the guy correctly who was unrepentant in stealing from my company. But another experience I had that kind of came up to me then was actually just being shafted by a peer. I was running the George Clothing sourcing office in Bangladesh. So I was offshore and I was the first person that had ever been sent offshore to do a job in that situation. And he was the sourcing director back in the UK, and he hated the fact that I was on the ground and that I was the one that was offshore. And so there were several incidences where he would undermine me, when he would take credit for something that I'd done, and trying to employ in that situation a continual thing of forgiveness, a continual thing of needing to be professional and having grace within him, but at the same time not being taken for granted, and not making sure that what he was representing actually wasn't right, and that impacted my team, and the balance between those things. So that was a real kind of just a day-to-day thing, which didn't kind of ever finish until I moved on from that job, which was a really tough one. But I think with all of these things, the thing that I've learned and taking into the business that I now run is that all of these experiences then enable you to reset, to relook at your policies, to relook at your processes, to close any loopholes, to create an environment where there is transparency, where people want to be transparent about what they're doing, where they want to be accountable for what they're doing, where you enable people to thrive within a goalpost that gives them comfort and security, in the same way that you would bring up a child, where you do have to say no to people sometimes because it's not the right thing for them. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned, is every time something like this happens, it surprises me, because I'm still just in awe of what the human mind and body can conceive as being a good thing to do. But being able to take that as a learning and practically then apply that to creating something that can be good onwards and onwards and onwards within there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dawn has immediately got a hand up. So go away. Fire away, Dawn.
Thanks. It's just one other comment really, that's in that sometimes you desperately want someone to understand what they've done wrong, and that they take accountability, and that they won't. just seen a comment in the post around should forgiveness follow repentance, and occasionally that's problematic. And in some settings, lawyers may be telling you don't admit any fault, don't admit any wrongdoing, so you never feel like you've properly actually got what you're looking for in terms of forgiveness, because the person who is being asked of may just be being told or be fearful of actually what that means in terms of responsibilities. That's just something I just wanted to, you know, to draw out. It's sometimes difficult in a corporate context to get that. Yes, I just wanted to raise that. It just popped up as a feed. I'll just comment.
Yeah, no, lovely, thank you. We're probably not all of you are in the UK, but in the UK we've been aware of some rather big companies that are facing this whole issue of forgiveness and accountability. Somebody has already mentioned the Post Office with Paula Venables, her leadership, and with the BBC with Hugh Edwards, a very esteemed news presenter, Harrods with Mohammed Al-Fayed, and then a whole host of companies, some that were responsible for clean blood that was actually contaminated, other companies responsible for clean rivers and lakes and waters, and they too have become contaminated. And then, of course, with the dreadful report that came out about the Grenfell fire a few years ago, companies responsible for producing cladding that's fireproof that turns out actually to be a massive fire hazard. So there's a fatal accident just waiting to happen. But these can be multiplied. And although these catch the headlines, we're probably all of us been in circumstances on a much smaller scale where these things happen on an almost daily basis. So we're very glad to be getting some questions coming in from you guys. I think one that seems to come through several of the questions is the extent to which you act as a Christian within a company. It's one thing to operate just grace within church contexts, but how does that work in a very secular world? I say secular world, but actually the language of forgiveness and apology is pretty rife at the moment, and you, in the media at least, you hear those words quite a lot, and sometimes even the word grace. So we think we're secular, but we actually often reach for spiritual language when we try and define these things. But maybe anybody on the panel can address this. Where do you think, Dawn's popping off a hand again, so be brief and then we'll hand on to someone else on the panel about that line between acting in church one way, how do you take that into a secular context?
I think the first probably most important point is that our mission field, for every one of us on this call, our mission field is our marketplace. It's our workplace environment. So that's what I believe God's placed us in, each of those workplace environments, in each of our roles that we have. And I think he's done so with good reason. And part of it is that we, with courage, bring our faith into difficult decision making, that we help individuals who may not have our faith foundation tackle things like forgiveness and accountability and repentance. They are tricky topics for individuals without a faith foundation, and I can say that categorically, working with boards that are all atheist, and my job as the conscience is to literally help them unpick, get proportionality, so that they can actually have a measured response. And I wrote here that being a Christian in a management team or leadership board is important work for the kingdom and in business. Revenge and reprisals are the extreme of justice, and our faith will help us to be the voice of courage inside those settings. Sometimes grace can feel like they've got away with it or that they've rolled over, when actually it is wisdom at work. So I think we have a really important job to play in being this counterbalance, especially if there's no apology or clear forgiveness coming our way for the wrong that's been done.
Yeah, Kim, you'll have an interesting perspective on this one. Then we'll come to Camille, because Kim works for a business school that is based on a Reformed Christian worldview. How do you approach that question?
So is that for Karen?
Yeah, that was for Kim.
Yep.
Kim, you need to unmute. Whilst Kim is unmuting, Camille, you had something to say. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think especially in this world of social media, there's a real demand for transparency now. And especially, you know, with the younger people coming up, they want to know the truth. They want, you know, honesty, transparency, and all of that. So I think we're seeing it not just in the Christian space, but across the board. There's a real demand for it and an appetite for the honesty and transparency.
I mean, we hear it all the time in politics, don't we? You know, Keir Starmer has to apologise for the gifts he's received. At the end of Rishi Sunak's regime, there was lots of calls. Rishi Sunak needs to apologise for leaving a war commemoration early, and et cetera, et cetera. And whichever country you're from, you're likely to be hearing this language all the time. So you're absolutely right, Camille. It's out there, and we need to bring Christian minds to it and good Christian practice. Karen, did you have something to say there? You look like you got.
I was going to say that I think the kind of acting like a Christian thing is something that people say, and I think there's a perception sometimes that Christians are going to say yes to everything, and forget that actually the process of accountability and forgiveness is sometimes as important as the actual act of forgiveness. So the process that you often take somebody through, where there has been a situation, the open dialogue that you have, the getting to the root of why something's happened and what motivated them to do something, and the journey of healing that goes on that is as important as the kind of, you know, oh, I've forgiven you, but actually there's been no substantial change and that person could likely do the same thing again. So I think as Christians, we have a duty not just to go from here to here, but, you know, in one big jump, but to actually to look at Jesus developed us as people. Jesus has character. Jesus has things that we want to be like with him. Do to others as you'd have them do to you, all the way through, not just that kind of jump at the end. And I think on that subject of what happens if somebody's unrepentant, forgiveness for me certainly is not just about I'm going to give you my forgiveness and therefore you're going to be better because I've given you my forgiveness. Forgiveness is as much about me as the forgiver healing in that process. And if somebody is unrepentant, that doesn't mean that I can't forgive them from my perspective. Whether they choose to receive that forgiveness is something that's always outside of our control. But us as human beings and us as in our own relationship with God, going through that journey of forgiveness and what that means to us as individuals is as important as whether that person receives that forgiveness as well.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And that's great about it being a process. And I hope this year that we will share good practice codes that we might have actually used, so we can all get better at managing a process of forgiveness and accountability. But Kim has unmuted herself, so we've got another couple of minutes.
On my phone, and so my technical skills are limited here. But so I work at a Christian university, and in our business school, we do ask the questions of what are the biblical principles that we can bring into whatever setting we find ourselves. And so in the corporate world, it's taking those principles. And again, back to kind of what I was trying to say before, if we're thinking about the act of forgiveness that we receive, it is, you know, how do we take that and then use that cycle in the world, in our organizations? And so systemically thinking about it. And so I think Don mentioned being lights, but also changing systems. And so when we think about, well, what does that practically mean? The example I gave is when we're dealing with difficult conversations with employees, where you have to come with thinking about, well, how do we do this in a caring, compassionate way while still being accountable and providing opportunities for changed behavior and renewed relationships, which those are the principles of forgiveness and redemption. And so how do we take those fundamental beliefs and not only behave that way individually, but try and create systems organizationally that live out those principles. And so that's what we try and do. Mostly we're asking the tough questions and having those dialogues.
Yeah, thank you. That's brilliant. David, did you have a last word? We've got one more minute before we go into breakout groups. Oh, you need to unmute.
Yes, mentioning the fireproof, so-called fireproof cladding, that is a national terrible disgrace. I have no idea how that got through the systems, the designers, first of all, who specify, and the contractors who buy the stuff. The British standards, are very strict on what goes into a building. So it's a national disgrace. And you're right, it could have been a terrible, terrible tragedy and much worse than it was. And thank you. It's being sorted and it won't occur again. But there's still a lot of it around on buildings all over the country.
Yeah, and David, you're saying this as somebody who's been involved in the construction industry, so this is close to your heart. Yes,
and I sat on the British standards, boards, not on anything to do with cladding, to do with concrete and cement and mortars and all, those other things. So I did my bit for the industry, and felt as a manufacturer I needed to be there.
Great. Well, this has just been such a great panel, because faith in business is all about rolling theology and practice together. And sometimes that can be a messy business, but it's always worthwhile. So I'm very excited about the year ahead. I think we've got great theological resources to bring to this, but also great practical competence amongst you all. And that's what we hope you'll share, both your theological perspectives